Maryland. Please join me in a warm welcome for Stacey, Abrams, and Michael Threes.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Good. Wonderful. Hi, Stacey. It's so nice to be with you today. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we are color coordinated. We didn't even know. I'm sure
Exactly.
no one believes us, but it just so happened to be. So I know
Book minds think alike.
It's libraries, it's books. So many library kids. I've heard one library kid say today, "Mom, I love this event so much. Stacey Abrams read me a book. Is she going to be here tomorrow?" So now you are Kansas's unofficial librarian. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Without further ado, are you ready to get into our very first question?
I am.
Are you all ready for our very first question? Yes. Here we go. Your newest picture book is called Stacey Speaks Up. Can you tell us a little bit about this story and what inspired you to write about this topic?
So I love children's books. My mom was a college librarian who specialized in children's literature. And so I grew up around books, and I love how storytelling, especially to young people, forces you to really concentrate on an issue. And for this third book in the Stacey Stories series, I wanted to talk about the combination of empathy and advocacy. Because we're in this moment where children are watching hard things happen, and they are feeling lots of big emotions. They don't necessarily have the language to describe it. And sometimes what they're feeling is powerlessness. And so I wanted to write a story that met them at their level, that took a universal topic, which is lunch, and gave children an opportunity to think about how they can feel for someone and then take action to accomplish something. And so Stacey Speaks Up is really about how we help children harness not only their sense of need to do something, but giving them a safe space and a point of entry to figure out how to get it done.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I mean, you've so successfully created that safe space with your books for these kids. I mean, mental health is such a problem in today's world, and feeling powerless. It's not an adult problem to suffer from mental health. It's a kid problem, a teen problem, an adult problem. So thank you so much for doing that. And importantly, for talking about lunch.
Yes.
Such a powerful answer to all of our problems.
Absolutely.
Snacks, mental health snacks, all that good stuff. And in Stacey's remarkable books, you tell a story of little Stacey connecting with a young friend in the library who is just learning English. What do you think the role of libraries and librarians were when you were growing up? Do you think that role has changed over time?
So I'm not permitted to think the role has changed because my mom was a librarian. It was in our contract. But so the story of Julie is actually based on a true story. I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, and we were one of the locations for the Vietnamese boat lift at the end of the Vietnam War. And Gulfport was not exactly the most diverse place to begin with, and then you suddenly had this influx of refugees from Vietnam. And Julie was trying to learn English around the same time she was learning Vietnamese. We were 6 and 7 years old, and we bonded over books. We bonded over books and the fact that I was a little taller, so when bullies would pick on her, I could stand in front of her and she could hide. That was my superpower. I was abnormally tall as a kid. But for me, the story was so important because we went to the library together. We found books that she could read and we could read together. I could share my love of reading, and she helped me overcome. I'm an introvert by nature, and I wouldn't say I'm shy. I'm particular. But I wasn't always willing to be public with my interests, and I didn't like making mistakes in public. And so Julie helped me figure out how to be a bit more assertive, and we used libraries. And to your question, that library was a space where we could explore all of these worlds. The world that she had come from, there weren't that many stories about it. The world that I lived in didn't always respect and admire where I came from. And for both of us, we could use books as a way to tell ourselves stories about who we wanted to be, who we were in that moment, and what possibility could look like.
Wow. That's so very special. I saw there were a lot of shaking heads and a lot of hmms when you said that you're an introvert. So it sounds like no one here believes that, but it's an introvert definition.
And you're one, I think, as well?
Very much so.
Yeah, we wouldn't talk about it, though, because we'd have to communicate.
Exactly, yes. And you know, I love that you mentioned your parents. Parents are so special. Grown-ups are so special in the library world, in literacy journeys. My mom, by the way, is not here. Many of you have asked, is Michael's mom here today? She is at home, minding her own business. But she would like me to say, if any of you see Patrick Mahomes, she said, please tell him hello on her behalf. I had to do that. But again, grown-ups, parents, they're so important in the role of literacy. What role did your grown-ups, your parents, your grandparents play in your literacy journey?
So my mom was a librarian, and she became a minister when I was around 14. But so I grew up not only with a librarian mother, but my parents couldn't afford daycare. So we went to the pre-K program that was on the campus, but it ended before my mom shifted. So they would then bring us to the library, and I literally slept in the stacks. So my first exposure to books was they were really soft. If you figured out which ones you laid on and which ones you didn't, but more than that, my mom loved to read to us. But I also learned to appreciate books from my dad. My dad is dyslexic.
Wow.
So, and he was undiagnosed until he was in his 30s. My parents grew up in segregated Mississippi during Jim Crow in underfunded schools when dyslexia was never diagnosed. So my dad was functionally illiterate until he was in his 30s, but he loved reading. And it was hard for him. And watching my dad read, it felt painful to watch until you realized just how much he loved the words. And he wasn't going to let his disability stop him. And so I grew up with a mother who was a voracious reader and a librarian, and a father who was an extraordinary storyteller who was willing to fight to read. And that, for me, harnessed this respect for reading. My other really seminal memory, I learned to read when I was really young. My older sister is 3 years older. And she taught me to read, in part, I think, because she was tired of reading to me. And so one day I was reading a book, it's Helen Keller, The Story of My Life, and I was sitting on my grandparents' house, and my grandfather came over and he teased me. He was like, "What are you doing? That's a big kid's book." And I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "You can't read that." I said, "Yes, I can." And I was also channeling Helen Keller at the moment, so I was like real feisty. And he told me to read something to him, and I started reading. He called out to my grandmother. He's like, "Bill, come here. Stacey can read big books." And I remember the pride I felt. Like, I knew I could read. My parents knew I could read. But when your grandparents see something that you can do, see the skill, and they validate it, and they celebrate it. When I think about children and literacy, it should be a moment of celebration every time they seek out knowledge, every time they want to know more, every time they show you a skill. And I know sometimes it can be frustrating, which is why the way I write my books, I write it so that parents don't get mad at me after the 15th read. 17, you're on your own, but I try to get you through the first. But it's that ability to encourage children to seek information and then to celebrate even the smallest moment, because they will always connect that sense of achievement with that opening and that turning of the page.
Yes. Wow. Wow, indeed. So it sounds like you've been remarkable all your life. We all have a ways to go to reach even a portion of who you are.
Somebody up here is the PBS resident librarian.
Whatever. You know what? I mean, they only did. I mean, I have Arthur Reed's library cards. The only reason they said yes. She got a tattoo at PBS. What are we supposed to do with this guy? But speaking of little library kid Stacey Abrams, what would little library kid Stacey Abrams think of today's modern Stacey Abrams?
I think she likes her. I grew up with parents and in a family that believed that you were supposed to do good. In fact, when people ask me my mantra, I say it's be curious, solve problems, do good. And I've believed that my whole life. I didn't articulate it until I was older, but that's who I was as a kid as well. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and my parents were very involved in social justice, in part because we had so little. They were always fighting for others, and I think little Stacey would be proud of big Stacey. She'll be a little annoyed about all of her stories that I tell, and be slightly embarrassed, but I try my best to be the best version of who I intended to be when I was little. And so hopefully, I'm still working on it. We'll see what happens. Hey.
It's a lifelong process. That's why we're in a library, the house of lifelong learning.
Exactly.
We're all just trying to be the best we can be, and I'm glad that you and I are having this conversation on stage. There was a time where people who looked like you and I weren't allowed to have library cards,
Yes.
weren't allowed to be in libraries, and now we see ourselves in these beautiful books, just like these
Exactly.
beautiful kids. We did it. Yes. And so thank you for all these stories that you've written. Congratulations on multiple picture books, multiple books. What advice would you give to any of our friends who are aspiring picture book authors or authors in general?
So I wrote my first book when I was a kid. So it turns out when you're little, if you tell stories, you're a fibber. If you write them down, you're a storyteller. And once I learned that translations matrix, I got really good at writing stuff down. My first attempt at a novel was when I was 12. It was called A Diary of Angst. I was a very, look, the way you are beset upon as a tween, it had to be written down. And I wrote my first novel in law school, actually. And so this is my first lesson in writing. I wrote my first novel in law school. It was supposed to be a spy novel, but publishers would not publish, and this is the late 90s, I'm way older than you. Publishers wouldn't publish spy novels by or about women. So think about if you can name one from the late 90s. And they wouldn't publish anything that had a black woman as the main character. And like, I know I've read spy novels by and about women, and I realized I read romance novels, and I watched a lot of General Hospital. And so I made my spies fall in love, killed the same number of people, did the same story I planned to tell. But that first lesson was adaptability. Sometimes the story we think we want to tell, we have to tell it in a different way or use a different means to get the story out. And so that was my first lesson. My second was persistence. My second big book that came out, I wrote While Justice Sleeps, which was my legal thriller. I wrote that in 2010. It didn't come out until 2021. And people thought it was based on some guy who was running for office. I wrote it long before I wrote it at a different time. But when I wrote it, I couldn't get anyone to publish it because I was now categorized as a romance novelist. And romance novelists could not possibly we couldn't transfer those skills. I'm like, it's words. I wrote tax policy articles. I can write thrillers. The second one is patience. So adaptability is first, patience is the second. Because I was so lucky the first time I wrote a book and it got picked up, I expected something faster. A decade is not fast, but once it got out there into the world, I was so grateful because now Avery Keene, my main character, has taken on a life of her own. And then the third is writing children's books. It's hard. Look, kids are brutal. They are. And taking a big concept like perseverance or empathy or cultural appropriation and cultural diversity, those are big topics. And sometimes the instinct when you're writing a kid's book is to lecture. My mission is to learn as I'm telling the story and to find the point of entry, but to be so respectful of kids. I write with bigger words because I remember as a kid, and I'm sure you felt that way, being challenged to learn while I'm listening because I'm gonna be reading it like 15 more times, so it's okay for me not to get it the first time. Yes. And so the first is adaptability, the second is patience, but the third is commitment. Yeah. If you're committed to telling the story, be willing to do the work to tell the story right. And when you only have 32 pages versus 340 pages, you got to get every word right. Yes. And that commitment was incredibly important, especially as a children's author.
Yeah. Man, thank you. Yes. Yeah, writing for kids is so difficult. Yes. They're the group of people who I love more than most people in the world is Eliza's children's librarian. They are evil, they are brutally honest, they cut you deep, they make fun of your afro, they make fun of your silly clothes. I call them the library kids.
Yes.
But you write stories for them, but you write so many more stories as well. You've written in so many different genres as an author: romance novels, legal thrillers, taxes, nonfiction, and picture books. What draws you to so many different kinds of stories? Do you have to change your approach as an author when you're writing those different genres?
Yeah, I love storytelling. I think, and it flows through all the things that I do. So whether I'm running for office or starting a business or starting a nonprofit, it's all about creating a vision. Storytelling is about creating a vision for this world that you can imagine and inviting people to come with you. And so I just try to find the genre that's the best medium for telling that story. I'm privileged to be able to write in different media and to be able to calibrate my story for the lesson I want to impart or the vision I want to have. It can be a bit disconcerting because when you're in the midst of writing, so when I was writing Stacey Speaks Up, I was also writing the third entry into Avery Keene, and that's about AI and how it's going to kill us all. And so, you know, you don't want that to infect what you're writing. And I also had to apologize to my computer several times just in case it was reading everything I was writing down. But for me, the toggling between storytelling is first and foremost about respecting your audience. If you respect your audience, then you are going to write the story that you need to tell, but that they can hear.
Yes.
And once you decide that those dual responsibilities are worth it, for me, it becomes a lot easier to write the story or to do the thing I need to do. But it's also about having fun. And it's not always fun writing. It's always fun imagining. The writing part is hard, and sometimes you either have to give them a book or their money back, and so you keep writing. But I think sometimes we want the whole thing to be fun, and it can't be. But as long as I still am in love with the world that I'm in, then writing, no matter what the genre is, becomes easier to stay in.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you for the advice. I think there's so many people here, there's so many kids who want to know the library, who want to be writers. Hopefully they take that to heart. There's so much joy in the world. We're in the library. Library's always been the most joyful place in the world to me. I talk about joy incessantly online. It's my favorite thing, my favorite word, because joy is there for us whenever we need it, every second, every minute, every day, every single year. And libraries are such a big part of that joy. The stories, we all have a voice, we all have a story to share, a story that deserves to be told. And not only do libraries play an important role in society, providing resources from computers to voting registration to mental health services to English classes, so many more things, but they also, just as importantly, bring joy to communities. How do libraries bring you joy?
I love the fact that there are buildings filled with knowledge. And that's it. That's what a library is. And as someone who loves adventures, one of the through lines in most of what I write, I love adventure. I love the thrill. And there's nothing more thrilling than finding that next book or finding that next story or finding information. And while I respect and appreciate the advent of the internet and how accessible information has become, libraries always also provide context for knowledge. And that's sometimes what we're missing. It's not the absence of information, it's the absence of context for that information. And that's what libraries protect. And it's why it's so dangerous that we have people who are attacking libraries. They are attacking access to knowledge and context. I read something recently that said that ignorance is an opinion without fact. That an opinion is information plus experience. And that a fact is information minus judgment. Well, libraries are information plus context. They are information plus experience, and it's information plus kindness. So you like joy. I like kindness. There is no one kinder than a person who has to figure out what in the world you're talking about when you describe the thing you're looking for. And who is patient enough to listen to you for the 14th time, try to ask, and that's assuming, and that's, the older people. Librarians are extraordinary people who have this capacity for patience and kindness, but also who are the least judgmental people you can imagine. My mom, and I'll wind down the answer, but my mom, I have this podcast called Assembly Required, which you should listen to. But I raise it because we recently had LeVar Burton. And the most fun I've had this year was having my mother in conversation with LeVar Burton. That was, jealous. The only other thing would be like being on Star Trek with him, but that's another conversation. But the question I asked my mom before we brought them together was, talk about how you address the question of religion and libraries, because my mother is a pastor now. My father are United Methodist ministers. And I asked her, you hear religion being used as a justification for pulling books off of shelves, for limiting access. And what my mom said is something that she said, the First Amendment protects information as much as it protects religion. Librarians are here as not neutral parties, but as guides. They are lodestones. They are helping guide you to the information you need. They are not there to judge the information you get. And so libraries are these judgment-free places where deeply opposing ideas can sit side by side in a card catalog and on a shelf. And if that can happen, then maybe the people coming into the library can learn something from that experience. And that's why libraries matter, because they make us all better people every single day.
Absolutely.
I mean, I preach it to the choir, but still. Yeah.
No, it is. They're the perfect people to speak to. They're the people who are going to speak up. They're the people who are going to fight. Library people are so empathetic. They're so lovely. I love the trust. I love the love that they have for library people. So often I go places and they'll just flash me the library card. And they'll flash them at the desk. They'll say, here's my library card, like it's Costco. Yeah. Like they're coming in and go, here's my library card. We're like, you don't even need a library card to be here, but I am so, so proud of you. I love that you talked about kindness. I love kindness as much as I love joy. My Mount Rushmore of kind individuals that I love, that I look up to are Mr. Rogers, LeVar Burton, who you mentioned, Bob Ross, Steve Irwin. Dolly Parton is an honorary fifth member of that Mount Rushmore. But I think they all encouraged us to speak up, which you talk about in Stacey Speaks Up. Little Stacey stands up for an issue that is important to her at school. And on October 19th, the American Library Association's Unite Against Book Bans is holding a Freedom to Read Day of Action. A Freedom to Read Day of Action, I say again. Libraries across the country are hosting events like rallies and letter writing parties. How do you encourage people of today to speak up? Do you have any advice for folks, kids and adults, who are looking for ways they can speak up in support of their local libraries on this day of action, or any time during the year? Every day can become a day of action.
So, number one, find your local librarian and say thank you. It feels small, but that moment of gratitude, I think, is just so important. The next job is to find your county commissioner, your city council member, your state legislators, and your governor. Hi. And tell them why you love libraries. But then the next thing is to tell 5 people you know to do the exact same thing. So I was a state legislator for 11 years. And I like to tell folks, politicians are like, and I would say this because I was one, we're like 15-year-old girls. We respond to money, peer pressure, and attention. And so, in a day of action, the attention that you drive towards libraries, the attention that you drive is not just about telling them what you want them to do, it's about telling them you're watching if they do it. And you don't have to agree with them on everything, but they have the obligation to hear you out on anything, because they've got the job. You may be elected from a district or from a city and by a certain party, but once you get the title, your job is to serve everyone. And so sometimes we self-constrain. We're like, well, I'm only going to talk to the person who agrees with me. What's the point of that? Talk to the person who doesn't agree with you, but don't lecture them on not agreeing with you. Give them a reason to agree. Tell them a personal story, but hold them accountable by actually showing up. On a day of action, we sometimes dismiss why it matters, but the sheer volume, when I talk about those 3 things, and most of you don't have the money to buy out the libraries. I know, there might be some secret billionaires in here. Peer pressure happens when you bring attention to the issue. You have the ability to bring attention, and you create peer pressure by saying, I talked to this person, and they did something. What are you going to do? A day of action is the beginning of change. It is not the only day. And so often we see a day of action as, oh, I did my thing that day, I'm good. No, that's the day you start. But your job is to start and then every day do something small. Everything Everywhere All at Once was a fantastic title for a movie. It is a terrible life mantra. But we can all do something somewhere soon. And we have to believe libraries are under attack. This is the first time in generations when they aren't just attacking the books, they're attacking the buildings. And we've seen leaders try to argue that libraries are dangerous, and we cannot presume that our history protects libraries, that the fact that they've been around as long as this nation means that they are invulnerable. Just like democracy, libraries are vulnerable because they are laboratories of democracy. There is nothing more democratic than a library shelf where everything has to be. And so I'm going to get off this high horse in 1 second, but I'm going to tell you that when we head towards October 19th, we have got to believe that we are fighting not just for the books, we're fighting for the buildings, we're fighting for the workers inside those buildings, and we cannot believe that our righteous indignation is sufficient. We have to marry that to action. As I say in Stacey Speaks Up, you know, sometimes we got to put our voices together. And this is about empathy for the library, but advocacy for making sure we protect them.
No, I echo every single thought. Libraries and librarians are indeed under attack. It's a sad day, but we're all banding together. Library kids, library grown-ups, libraries, we're all in this fight for library joy, for library kindness, for everything. I love it so much. I love that people call librarians superheroes. They think our cardigans are capes. I don't know if anyone ever told you this. But as much as I love
lots of glasses hiding your identities.
just like Clark Kent, now we understand why people didn't know who Superman was.
There you go.
But I think it's important to know in saying that the library people are superheroes in a way, but they're also very much human beings. They need empathy as much as they give out. So please be kind to your local library people. Like you said, write them a letter, go into the library, just say thank you for all that they've done. They saved my life on countless occasions. They've saved many a library kid. And with that being said, I believe we're just about the audience questions.
Okay.
So as we wait for some audience questions to hopefully come in, I would like to ask you, do you remember your local librarian from when you were a little library kid?
I mean, it was my mom, so yeah. I mean, we would go to the public library, usually during the summer. We would go because they had a broader array. But because my mom was the college librarian, and she did children's literature, there was a lot to get through. But yes, in fact, she was lovely. She was a lovely woman, but she would be afraid because I have 5 brothers and sisters. And the first time we all went to the library together, they did not have a book limit. That changed after the first time, because we swarmed the library like locusts. And because we only had 2 TV channels, ABC and PBS, and it was summer, so it was all reruns. And we had all this free time. That means all the books you can carry. And that's what we did. We carried a lot of books. And so she just had this look of both pride and abject fear as we approached the counter, because each of us, we had armloads of books, and she was just like, y'all want all of those? We're like, yeah, and because we would read our own and then we would share with each other. And she's like, I mean, but it looked like there had been like a storm. It's like all the water off the shelves. We had all the books. So after that, there was a conversation about maybe not taking all of them each time. So, but yeah, she was lovely.
I love that. I relate. My mom homeschooled me, so people always say, do you remember your favorite teacher from when you were a kid? My mom was my favorite teacher as a kid. We have a question. Our question is, what book or what books made you a reader?
So the very first books I remember reading, Make Way for Ducklings, because I loved it because, so again, I'm the second of 6 kids, and whenever we would go places, we always looked like Make Way for Ducklings. Then my first chapter book was Little Women, and then Helen Keller, The Story of My Life. The first 2 books I remember just falling in love with and reading over and over again. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster was one of my favorite books of all time. Like, I was deeply disappointed that there was never a tick or a tock coming to get me. And I'm like, how did Milo get picked and I didn't? That was really upsetting. And then while I understand that there were some challenges with his language and the stories he would tell, 2 of my favorite authors were Dr. Seuss and Edward Eger. He wrote a book called Half Magic. And I wanted desperately to find a coin, because half magic, if you made a wish, you got half your wish. So if I wished to be over there, I could get halfway there, or half of me could get there. And you never knew what was going to happen. And so those were the books that I loved, the books that challenged language and imagination, and that took really basic constructs and kind of twisted them a little bit, always made me happy.
I love those. Those are all such great books. I don't know if you knew, but Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who is actually an apology to the voiceless, to those he said the who's, those who are hearing. So
I actually wrote my college essay on Horton Hears a Who. Yeah.
of course, see? This is why we're up here.
Library kids unite, man. But you should explain a little bit more about why that, because I think people give him a bad rap. Can you explain a little bit more?
I can do the best I possibly can. So Dr. Seuss, unfortunately, was quite racist. He said some evil things. He did some evil things in writing the different books. So much so that his family, who of course Dr. Seuss passed away. So his estate has actually removed several books from the collection. They will not allow them to be published anymore. A lot of people give Dr. Seuss a lot of grief. Some of it deserved, but they never say that Dr. Seuss apologized profusely on multiple occasions for what he said, for what he did. And Horton Hears a Who is just one of the books. Most of the books after that, The Lorax is also an apology. Horton Hears a Who is an apology. So yes, Dr. Seuss made a lot of wrongs in his life, as many of us have, but he tried to do better. He tried to say, please forgive me, here are books for your kids. I recognize that I said some things that they should never have had to hear, but here's my collection of silly, zany rhymes. Please read these new ones. So there's so much more. Hopefully, maybe you can make your essay available to people.
Never.
That's locked in this library's vaults,
There
right?
you go.
So it's
Absolutely.
down there. Yeah.
There you go.
And you know what? I love that you talked about your father's dyslexia. And someone asked, what is your message to us as October is Dyslexia Awareness Month? And so many adults and kids are still going undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. You said such lovely things, but I think if you have a message to anybody this month, they would love to hear it.
That you are seen and you are valued. When you're growing up, you don't quite know what the problem is. You just know that there's a challenge. And my dad used to tell us these stories. So my mom would read to us Monday through Thursday at night. On Friday, because my dad worked at a shipyard, he was always home late and he was always exhausted. But Fridays, he would, when they put us to bed, he would tell these just outlandish stories. And it was kind of like a G-rated Game of Thrones. Because you had dragons, you had pirates, you had all kinds of stuff, because he would have to weave in everybody's favorite things. He had like a fairy, because one of my sisters liked fairies, and then, I liked swords, and then my brothers wanted a race car. Anyway, so, and the reason I talk about his willingness to tell stories was that it made us realize just how much he loved reading, even though it was hard for him. But he never gave up. My dad reads every book that I write. I wrote an essay on the operational dissonance of the unrelated business income tax exemption, and other than like 5 nerds in law school and 12 tax lawyers, my dad's the only other human I know who read it. Because, and I also watched my dad go back to graduate school at the age of 40 to get a master's degree in he got a master's of divinity with my mom at Emory University, so not a low-key cool school. I bonded with my father during that experience because neither of my parents know how to type. They may know how and they just lied, but I became their typist. So I'm a senior in high school, and I would go to class in the day, and I would come home and have to type all their essays for them. And like the best moment of my childhood was when I told my parents to turn off the TV and go do your homework because I have a curfew. But I say that because I would have to read what my dad read so I could translate, because my dad's a left-handed dyslexic. So it was like translating Cyrillic. But I would read, so I got to read what my dad was reading because that was how I could figure out sort of the starting place and how to translate for typing for him. And what I realized is how smart he was. You are so smart. To navigate a world that does not intend for you to understand in the way that you learn and to be still a part of it, we talked about superpowers. That is a superpower. Yes. Your perseverance, your relentlessness, and your grace in not demanding every day that the world change itself for you, those are extraordinary parts of yourself. And it's what I admire about my father. My dad did not let dyslexia define him, but he let it make him determined to find a way to navigate this world. And those were the only challenges he faced. But in this month of celebration, we celebrate your courage, celebrate your perseverance, but don't be embarrassed. And that's just the other piece. My dad was embarrassed about it for a while. And then he started talking about it. don't let yourself be boxed into being alone because you think it's the wrong thing to say. Open yourself up to let other people know how they can be a part of inviting you in and being of assistance, and sometimes just being celebratory with you when you get the good thing done.
Yes. No. Thank you. Yeah, what an extraordinary human being your father is, and you describe your mother too. No wonder you are the way that you are because of those phenomenal people. I love that they embraced what made them different. Even though they had shame in it, I love that they made it. It's why they are the way that they are now. There's so much shame, there's such a crisis, and they're trying to love ourselves. We put too much shame on disability, on mental health, on being dyslexic. It's a crisis, and we need to recognize that we can love ourselves. That's the goal of the library. That's why we have stories. That's why we have books. And then we also are in a literacy crisis. And oftentimes, parents aren't seen as partners in the education of their children, parents and grown-ups. What would you say to schools and districts in regards to empowering them to aid the literacy of development for their children?
I would begin by acknowledging that for some, the literacy crisis is at home. And there's often, judgment tends to precede solution. We tend to judge a person on whether they're doing the right thing for their kids as opposed to asking, do you have the tools you need to do what needs to be done? Do you have books at home? Do you know how to get a library card? I would have a library day where I would partner with the school and the public library and invite parents to be a part of that at the school or bring them to the library, because sometimes we presume people don't do because they won't. Sometimes it's because they don't know or they are embarrassed. The illiteracy rate in our country is so high in part because we underdiagnose learning disabilities, because we have had for many years schools that were doing the best they could with what they had, but it was insufficient for what they needed. And the product of that is often a parent. And so we've got to create space and grace for those parents to come in. And then we've got to give them the tools. Like, it's about making sure that there are books available and that you teach parents how to teach children to read. We presume they know, they don't. And if we don't create that opportunity, sending home a worksheet that says, mom and dad, parent, do this, or have them do that, but don't assume they know, because it's often not ignorance, or so it's often not, it's not obstinacy, it's that they simply don't know what to do, but they're ashamed to ask, or they think they're doing the right thing and it's all wrong, and there's no one to correct it. And so if you're going to celebrate reading and celebrate literacy, celebrate the journey as much as we do the destination, and invite parents, invite guardians, invite grown-ups to come on that journey so they learn how to be better readers with the children that they're helping.
No, it's so very true. Yes. Yeah, no, the literacy crisis, it's so very real, but all that you said is so very true. But it's also just that there's so much panic when it comes to literacy. Literacy is Panic at the Disco of today. And all we have to do is really, I talk about joy all the time. That's what it takes to start literacy, is joy. Let your kids read books over and over again. I know parents, you're sick of Bluey. Let them read the Bluey books. Let them read the Spider-Man books. Audiobooks are real reading.
Yes,
Manga is real reading. Audiobooks are real reading. Let them read. Let them love what they want to read 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and then they will love reading. They will love books. They'll love the library. And I think as we have about time for one more question,
And I'll give a really fast answer.
I think we have to ask, what have you read recently and loved?
So I read a lot. So I just finished reading The City in the City by Chena Melville, and also Drunk on All Your Strange New Words, which are two very different books. But they're both a lot of fun and very interesting. I read a lot of biographies, so I'm currently reading about Simone de Beauvoir. So, just mixing it up a little bit.
Doing what you can.
There you go.
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you all.
Can I do one?
Please.
So this was him asking me questions, but can we thank Michael for being one of those Can we thank the interpreters who had to listen to me talk real fast? Now I'm done.
Nope. Hey, listen, thank you very much. So let's give a big round of applause to Stacey Abrams and also Michael. Thank you for being here. All right, thank you. So we're going to give them just a minute to kind of get settled and let Ms. Abrams make her way over to be ready to sign the books. And I'm totally standing in front of you. Don't let me do that. So I just want to thank all of you. Your presence here, so I should say, I'm Abby Yellman. I am the new Library Director or Chief Executive Officer for the Kansas City Public Library. So I have to tell you, and I'll be brief, it has been inspiring to be back in Kansas City. Ooh, I'm getting choked up. To be back in a city that I've loved for a long time. It's inspiring to look out in this audience and see people that helped raise me, that are in this community, seeing the diversity in this room. I'm just grateful for all of you for being here. Your presence here is what makes the Heartland Book Festival and the library such a special place to truly celebrate stories, ideas, and community. We hope that you leave feeling inspired, having discovered new perspectives, and with a deeper connection to the literary world and, of course, to each other. We'd love to hear your feedback, so this is the technical part of my job. On your program, there's a QR code. If you can take a minute, librarians love feedback. So please fill that out, take that survey for us so we can continue to improve this festival year after year. Thank you, of course, to our partners, Missouri Humanities and the Missouri Center for the book, and for their invaluable support and partnership as we plan this year's event. Finally, I would be remiss, it is with great pride that I say please give a loud round of applause to the Kansas City Public Library staff that made this day possible. And again, we know we don't do it alone, so we're very grateful for our partners, Missouri Humanities. Thank you. I'm looking for Ashley. Is she right in front of me? Okay, she might be waving at me. So we're going to ask you to very kindly and carefully walk over if you want to get your book signed. And we look forward to next year's festival. Invite you back. Invite your friends. We'll see you next year. Have a great day.